everybody, this is Chris from Green Light Quilts, and I'm here to show you a quick overview today of basting. Basting is a necessary evil. It's my least favorite thing to do, but if you do it incorrectly, you're going to have a big mess down the line. So there's a couple things to know. First, I want to point out that I'm in my husband's garage, and if I ever do a reel in here, it will never, ever, ever be picked up. But with that said, he does allow me the space occasionally for my tables to be set up. These are foldable tables from Costco. Notice they're kind of fuzzy. That happens over time with the spray and the batting. It's kind of like a never-ending battle, but that's the way it is. I developed this technique for basting when I bought these tables because the lip was too big to clamp. And to be honest, my hands weren't that strong to clamp fabrics onto, so I found this way and this has worked great. And to date, as far as I know, I've not had a pucker in the back at all, so yay me. All right, so what I've done is I have my client's quilt here, and she informed me, which I really appreciate, that she worked diligently for her fabric to be directional. So it's kind of growing up. So this is the bottom, that's the top. And it's important to notice this because the back is also directional. And if you don't look really close, it could be, that you have them, you don't want to discover that they're not in the same direction after you've done all your quilting. So anyway, so I have the set. I also have some 80% cotton, 20% wool batting. I like to cut mine just a couple inches bigger than the quilt top. I laid the batting down on the tables and I have the quilt on top, nice and as straight as I can. Then what I do is I expose half of the quilt. I take the 505 spray. And also I'm in a ventilated area, so there's fresh air and the air is moving. You don't want to do this in your house on the floor. It's just, you'll break your back, you'll pull your muscles, and you'll ruin your floor with this stuff. Also, if I'm going to be doing a lot of basting, I make sure that I have my Crocs on and shoes that I don't care if they get all hairy and spray. It does go down, the spray stuff. So I'm going to spray, and you don't want to use a lot of spray. It will goop up your needle and it will make it difficult. And if I'm going to focus on any point at all, I'm going to focus on the edges. I'm going to get extra. All right. Then you take half. And I'm just gonna lightly, gently lay it down. And then you start from the center, and with a flat hand, you're gonna straighten it out. Now, I'm gonna tell you that if you have an activity watch, watches love this. You get lots of exercise credit for doing this. Middle to out. And you want to just make sure that it's nice and flat. When I run my hand over, I want to make sure there's no like riptide of fabric that will fold. Get this side, same way. You start from the center and go out. If you're gonna like make this for the Queen of England, which I've never had to finish a quilt for the Queen of England before, but at this point you want to make sure, extra sure, that your corners are nice and square. You could get a square ruler, because if you baste it misshapen, it's gonna end up misshapen in the end. 99.9% of the time, I don't worry about that though. Okay, now that I've got that side done, I do a quick check by grabbing the end, and if the batting comes up too, then I know I have enough spray on. That's a good little check. Some fabrics are temperamental, and the spray doesn't stick to them. And the stuff that I can think of offhand would be some of those heavily starched and treated fabrics you get at like Joann Fabrics. They just sometimes have a difficulty. Now a perfectly basic quilt, you see how, and it's cooperating, that the quilt just stops. So I know where I've ended. I'm going to do that again to this side. Sometimes I make a game of it, like how little spray can I get away with. But that's after many years of experience. I can tell right away when a quilt is misbehaving. I had one student in a class, she basted a baby quilt, and it was unquiltable, it just couldn't work. And I asked her, like, well, how much spray did you use? And she said, well, it was just a little baby quilt. She's like, well, pretty much the whole can. Oh, no. I was like, I know, it's not single service, honey. I think, some people ask me, one of the larger cans, you should be able to get 4 to 5 lap quilts. You could probably get 4 or 5 quilts this size. Maybe a king size plus a lap. Obviously, the bigger the quilt, the more you need. But definitely, you could probably get 15 baby quilts out of that thing, not one. Okay. Again, making sure it's nice and flat, and I'm happy, it's looking good. The center is nice, everything looks glued down. And if you have your hand, like, and pressed it down on the whole thing, that gives you more opportunity to make sure that the whole thing is stuck. I'll do the glue test. Okay, that's good. And this one, see how it came up a little bit? I'm just gonna hit just a little bit. The edges and the corners are the things that are gonna give you trouble, mostly. Now I'm gonna remember that this is the top side, as we talked about before. So I wanna keep that top side. I'm directionally challenged sometimes. Go ahead, Kate, I know you're thinking it.
Sometimes?
Kate would say I'm more than directionally challenged. That would be the least of my worries. But I really have to think, like, where is the top? And so this fabric that she had for the backing, which is really pretty floral, and it's definitely directional. And you know, at first glance, you might not think so, but you can see how the flowers are growing up. Right? Okay, there they are. And so she knew. Now, if you're doing your quilt and you're buying backing, and it is directional, just make sure that you buy enough. Like, you can't have a horizontal seam. And Sharon and I have worked together for a long time, and she knows I don't like a bunch of extra fabric, so she will trim it down for me. And I don't need a lot of fabric doing it this way. If you take it to a long armor with a frame, they ask you to have like 3 or 6 inches more on all sides. I don't need that much. I don't like that much. Also, I get some questions and inquiries about the seam. I generally will place the seam wherever it ends up to conserve the most fabric. I don't buy into having the seam right in the center because folding puts pressure on the seam. People mostly fold it like right in the middle. So I just the seam kind of goes where it goes. Now, as I have the backing laid out, I just want to make double sure that there's enough backing to cover the front part, especially because I have some batting and I have plenty, so I'm good. Now, if you really hate your quilter, give them a striped back. Because I cannot emphasize how hard it is to line up a big stripe on a quilt. But I finally learned a trick, and I'm happy to share it with you. One of my students had a wedding quilt, and she put the well wishes from all the guests in squares on the back. And the back was nice and centered, and I have to tell you, I stressed out a little bit because she worked so hard at getting the back just so. So what I did, and this is like an aha moment I had 10 years into my career, I found the center of the front, which would be right about here, because there's this 4 blocks and this is right here. And what I did was I snipped the batting in the center on each side and then on the ends. And then when I put the backing on, I found the centers and matched it to the notch on my batting. It was like,
so clever.
Duh. I mean, you guys don't know how many they weren't ruined, but I mean, and you would do the same with a stripe. If you had a big wide stripe, you could mark your batting after you get the top basted and then line up your stripe. It's really, really, I can't emphasize, it's really hard to line up a backing like that, but I know. After that, I can retire. Oops. Also, you see, you probably can't see really good, but there, I try to, like all those little spare threads, it's just a habit to make sure that there's nothing there. Especially on the front, you know, if there's light fabric, you can have, you know, it can shadow through. Now the backing, theoretically, is the stuff that's underneath, so you can't see it all the time. That's the bad news. The good news is it's not heavily pieced, so almost all the time your backing is going to be nice and flat. You don't have the trouble with, you know, excess border fabric or wanky piecing. It's just, it usually will lay nice and flat. And I will say in my career, and I've done, probably I'm in the thousands of quilts now, the time I have trouble with the quilt or the quilting part is if there's too much excess fabric on the back. If I get lazy and I don't trim it, it always comes back to bite me, literally. And if I don't secure the edge, or make sure that the edges are secured with the test. Because this is what will separate from the quilt. It gets tucked under, and then that's when you get the tuck in the back. You don't know you have a tuck in the back until you're done. And there's nothing that's less fun than unquilting. Okay, so this is the final. It's also really nice to have a nice big flat surface to do this. It makes it a lot easier. If you don't have tables, sometimes like church basements will have them. Sometimes your favorite quilting store will allow you to go and use their tables. So there's other ways, but you know, if you're gonna do a lot of quilting, these tables are nice. My husband doesn't think so, but and just like the front, make sure it's nice and stuck. 505 spray, I mean, I have I have basted quilts and then worked on them a year later. It stays in until you wash it out.
So Chris, for your nice surface here, you have 3 6-foot tables, is that correct?
Yep.
Okay.
And when I'm feeling generous and agree to do a king size quilt for somebody, which is fewer and fewer now, I also have that 8-foot table that I will put on one of the sides lengthwise.
Oh.
If your quilt, I'm glad you mentioned that, Kate, if your quilt is just a little bit longer than the tables, you can either get most of it basted and then slide the quilt down, or you can separate the tables a little bit to give you a little bit of extra surface. I would rather ensure that my edges are nice and secure and have it on a flat surface. So you can see that Sharon left me enough that I have a little bit extra. You see that little bit extra? I've learned that that little bit is like what's really annoying that gets into trouble. Your stepchild, I don't know. But that's what will get you into trouble. And so I just like to take a little snip, and this is where I'll get rid of the extra. And then make sure that as you're ripping, that you're not ripping, it's not ripping too much. That's on green. You know, some people will sew together and the initial cut is not square. There's so many things that can happen with the backing. Okay, let's make sure. Just a little poop. And then that should be good. And then just to make sure, I'm going to double check this side is going up. The flowers are growing up. And here the flowers are growing up. She told me she had one black that was not right. So, yes, these kind of things that you can share with your quilter really help. I probably wouldn't have known on first glance that this quilt was directional until she pointed it out to me. So, anyway, and then I just make sure it's nice and flat. And now it's ready to be quilted. I hope you've enjoyed this boring, tedious, but very important step to the quilting process. And have a good day.